The Grand Meridian Hotel stood tall in the heart of the city like a palace from another time. Its walls had seen presidents, movie stars, and billionaires walk through its golden doors. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed to touch the sky. The floors were so polished you could see your own reflection in them. It was the kind of place where dreams were made and broken in the same breath. Maria Gonzalez knew every corner of this hotel. She knew which floorboard creaked near the kitchen entrance. She knew exactly how many steps it took to walk from the service elevator to the main ballroom. She knew the smell of expensive perfume mixed with old money. But she did not know these things because she was a guest. She knew them because for the past 3 years, she had been invisible here. Every Friday and Saturday night, Maria would wake up early and take 2 buses to reach the hotel. She would change into her plain black uniform in the small staff room that smelled like cleaning supplies. She would pin back her dark curly hair so tight that sometimes her head would hurt by the end of the night. Then she would put on her comfortable black shoes, the ones with the worn-out soles, and she would become nobody. That was the job of a waitress at the Grand Meridian. To be seen but not noticed. To be present but not remembered. To serve with a smile and disappear like smoke. Maria was 26 years old, but some nights she felt like she had lived 100 lives. When she looked at the wealthy guests in their designer gowns and tailored suits, she did not feel jealous. She felt tired. The kind of tired that sleep cannot fix. The kind that settles deep in your bones when life keeps taking, and you have nothing left to give. But it was not always like this. 5 years ago, Maria was a different person. She was a student at one of the most famous music schools in the country. Juilliard. Just saying the name used to make her heart race with pride. She had earned her spot there through years of practice, through bleeding fingers and sleepless nights, through a talent that her teachers said was rare and beautiful. The piano was her first love. She had started playing when she was just 4 years old, on an old keyboard her grandmother had found at a yard sale. The keys were yellow, and some of them stuck, but to little Maria, it was the most magical thing in the world. She would sit for hours, figuring out melodies by ear, teaching herself songs she heard on the radio. By the time she was 10, she was performing at local competitions. By 15, she had won a national award. By 18, she had a full scholarship to Juilliard, and her mother had cried for 3 days straight from happiness. Those were the golden years. Maria would wake up every morning and walk through the halls of the conservatory feeling like she belonged to something bigger than herself. She would practice until her back ached and her fingers cramped. She would close her eyes and let the music carry her to places she had never been. She had plans. Big plans. She was going to perform at concert halls around the world. She was going to make her mother proud. She was going to prove that a girl from a small town with nothing but a dream could become something extraordinary. But life had other plans. It started with a phone call during her final year. Her mother's voice was shaking on the other end. The doctors had found something. Something bad. The word cancer hit Maria like a truck. Suddenly, the concert halls and the dreams and the music felt very far away. Suddenly, the only thing that mattered was getting home. She took a leave from school. Just a semester, she told herself. Just until her mother got better. But the treatments were expensive. The bills piled up like mountains. Insurance covered some of it, but not enough. Never enough. Maria watched their savings disappear. She watched her mother grow thin and weak. She watched everything they had worked for slip through their fingers like sand. She never went back to Juilliard. Instead, she picked up shifts at restaurants, then hotels, then anywhere that would pay. Her music degree sat in a folder in her closet, next to a stack of rejection letters from orchestras and music schools. She had applied to so many places in those first 2 years, sent recordings of her performances, written heartfelt letters explaining her situation. Most did not even bother to reply. The ones that did said the same thing. We regret to inform you. Position has been filled. Better luck next time. After a while, she stopped applying. It hurt too much to hope. Her mother was in remission now, thank God. The cancer was gone. But the debt remained. Maria was still paying off hospital bills that seemed to have no end. Every paycheck went to rent, to bills, to the mountain of money they still owed. There was nothing left for dreams. There was barely anything left for living. The piano in her apartment had not been touched in months. Sometimes, she would walk past it and feel a pain in her chest so sharp it took her breath away. It was like seeing an old friend who did not recognize her anymore. She told herself she would play again someday, when things got better, when there was time, when it did not hurt so much to remember who she used to be, but tonight, she could not think about any of that. Tonight was the biggest event of the year. The Harrington Foundation Gala. The Harringtons were old money, the kind of family whose name was on hospital wings and university buildings. Every year, they hosted this charity event at the Grand Meridian. And every year, it attracted the richest and most powerful people in the country. Politicians, celebrities, business tycoons. The guest list read like a who's who of American wealth. Maria had worked this event twice before. She knew the drill. Smile, serve, stay silent. Do not make eye contact for too long. Do not speak unless spoken to, and whatever you do, do not spill anything. She stood in the service area now, adjusting her apron and checking her reflection in a small mirror on the wall. The woman staring back at her looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. But her uniform was pressed and clean. Her hair was neat, and her shoes were polished. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be. A waitress. Nothing more. Outside, she could hear the guests arriving. The sound of expensive heels clicking on marble floors. The low hum of laughter and conversation. The soft notes of a piano being tuned in the ballroom. She froze for a moment when she heard that sound. The piano. Someone was running through scales, warming up for the evening performance. The notes floated through the air and wrapped around her heart like a ghost from her past. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Not tonight, she told herself. Tonight you are not a pianist. Tonight you are nobody. She picked up her tray, straightened her shoulders, and walked out into the glittering ballroom. The night was just beginning. But something in the air felt different. Maria could not explain it. It was like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She had no idea that in just a few hours, her whole life was about to change. The ballroom was alive with light and laughter. Everywhere Maria looked, she saw wealth on display. Diamond necklaces that probably cost more than her apartment building, watches that could pay off her mother's medical bills 10 times over. Dresses that were worn once and never again because wearing the same thing twice was simply not done in these circles. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, her tray balanced perfectly on one hand. Champagne glasses clinked. Conversations floated past her in fragments. Talk of stock markets and vacation homes and charity auctions where people bid thousands of dollars on things they did not need, just to prove they could. Maria had learned to tune it all out. When she first started working these events, she would listen to the guests talk and feel a bitterness rising in her chest. It was not fair. These people had so much, and they did not even appreciate it. They complained about traffic in their luxury cars. They worried about which country club to join. They had problems that were not really problems at all. But over time, the bitterness faded into something quieter. Acceptance. Maybe. Or just exhaustion. It took too much energy to be angry all the time. So Maria stopped comparing her life to theirs. She stopped wishing things were different. She just did her job and went home and tried not to think too much about what could have been. Tonight, she had been assigned to the west side of the ballroom, near the large windows that overlooked the city skyline. It was a good spot. The guests here were mostly older couples, polite and quiet. The kind who said thank you when she refilled their water glasses. Some of the younger servers hated working the galas because the guests could be demanding and rude. But Maria did not mind. She had dealt with worse. The evening program was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. A welcome speech from Mr. Harrington, followed by a performance from some famous pianist whose name Maria could not remember. Then dinner, then the charity auction, then dancing until midnight. It was the same schedule every year. Predictable. Boring. Safe. Maria glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:30. The guests were starting to move toward their tables, settling in for the main event. The Steinway grand piano sat in the spotlight near the front of the room, polished and perfect, waiting for the artist who would bring it to life. She was heading back to the kitchen to reload her tray when she noticed something strange. Mrs. Whitmore, the event coordinator, was standing near the service entrance with a phone pressed to her ear. That was not unusual. Mrs. Whitmore was always on the phone, always managing some crisis or another. But something about her posture made Maria slow down. The woman's shoulders were tense. Her free hand was gripping the doorframe like she needed it to stay standing. Her face, usually so composed and professional, had gone pale. Maria knew she should keep walking. Whatever was happening, it was not her business. She was just a waitress. Her job was to serve drinks and stay out of the way. But something made her linger near the door, pretending to adjust the napkins on her tray while she listened. "What do you mean he is not coming?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice was sharp, but Maria could hear the panic underneath. "The performance starts in 30 minutes. 30 minutes. There was a pause. Maria could not hear what the person on the other end was saying, but she could see the effect it had on Mrs. Whitmore. The woman's face went from pale to gray. Her hand trembled slightly as she pressed the phone harder against her ear. "A car accident," she repeated slowly, like the words did not make sense. "Is he all right? Will he?" No. I understand. Of course his health comes first. Yes, I understand. Thank you for calling." She lowered the phone and stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then she said a word that Maria had never heard her say before. A word that did not belong in a place like this. Among the crystal and the silk and the $100 champagne, Maria felt a strange twist in her stomach. The pianist was not coming. The famous musician who was supposed to be the highlight of the evening, the reason half these people had bought tickets, was not coming. She watched as Mrs. Whitmore took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. The mask of professionalism slid back into place, but it was cracked now. Maria could see the fear behind it. This was not just an inconvenience. This was a disaster. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Mrs. Whitmore made call after call, her voice getting more desperate with each one. Maria caught pieces of the conversations as she moved through the ballroom. Every pianist in the city was either booked or unavailable. It was a Saturday night. Nobody was sitting at home waiting for a last-minute call to perform at a charity gala. Word began to spread among the guests. Maria could see the whispers moving through the crowd like ripples on water. Something was wrong. The program was supposed to start by now. Why was nothing happening? Where was the music? Mr. Harrington appeared near the piano, his wife at his side. They were trying to look calm, but Maria could see the tension in their smiles. Mrs. Harrington kept touching her pearl necklace, a nervous habit that she probably did not even realize she had. Mr. Harrington's jaw was tight, the muscles working as he clenched his teeth. This gala was their legacy. The Harrington Foundation had been raising money for children's hospitals for over 20 years. Every year, this event brought in millions of dollars in donations. Every year, the music was a centerpiece of the evening, a reminder of beauty and hope in a world that often had too little of both. And now there was no music. Maria watched Mrs. Whitmore approach the Harringtons. She could not hear what was said, but she could read the body language. The event coordinator's apologetic gestures. Mrs. Harrington's hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Harrington closing his eyes for a long moment, like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. The guests were getting restless now. Some had started to leave their tables, wandering toward the bar or clustering in small groups to gossip. The energy in the room had shifted from excitement to confusion. People had paid thousands of dollars to be here tonight. They expected a show. They expected entertainment. They expected something. And so far they were getting nothing. Maria finished her round and returned to the service area. The other waiters were buzzing with the news. "Did you hear? The pianist is not coming. Car accident. Can you believe it? What are they going to do?" She leaned against the wall and watched the drama unfold through the doorway. Part of her felt bad for the Harringtons. They were not cruel people. They had always been polite to the staff. Always said please and thank you. Always treated the servers like human beings instead of furniture. This night meant something to them. And now it was falling apart. But another part of her, a small and secret part, felt something else entirely. Her eyes kept drifting to the piano. That beautiful Steinway sitting silent in the spotlight. It looked lonely somehow. Abandoned. Like it was waiting for someone who would never come. She knew she should look away. She knew she should stop thinking about it, but her fingers were tingling at her sides, and her heart was beating a little faster than it should, and somewhere deep inside her, a door that had been locked for 5 years was starting to crack open. She thought about the program, Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff. Pieces she had played 100 times. Pieces she could play in her sleep. Pieces that lived in her bones and her blood, even after all these years of silence. She thought about the guests out there, waiting for something magical to happen. She thought about the children who would benefit from tonight's donations. Children who were fighting battles they were too young to understand. She thought about her mother, who had always believed in her, even when Maria stopped believing in herself. And she thought about the piano. That beautiful, lonely piano. What if? The question appeared in her mind before she could stop it. What if she walked out there right now? What if she sat down at that bench and put her fingers on those keys? What if she stopped being invisible, just for one night? It was a crazy thought. A stupid thought. She was a waitress. These people would laugh at her. Mrs. Whitmore would fire her on the spot. She would humiliate herself in front of 300 of the most powerful people in the city. But the thought would not go away. It sat there in her chest, burning like a small flame that refused to die. She looked at the piano again. She looked at Mrs. Whitmore, still frantically making calls. She looked at the Harringtons, standing together with their broken smiles and their shattered plans. And then she looked down at her hands. The hands that had once made music so beautiful it brought people to tears. The hands that had not touched a piano in 8 months. The hands that were trembling now, not from fear, but from something that felt dangerously like hope. The door inside her cracked open a little wider, and Maria began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, tonight was the night everything would change. Maria stood frozen near the service door, her tray still in her hands. She watched the chaos unfold like a movie playing in slow motion. Mrs. Whitmore was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, her face getting redder with every call that went to voicemail. Mr. Harrington stood near the piano with his wife, trying to calm her down. But even from across the room, Maria could see the embarrassment in their eyes. The guests were getting restless. Some were checking their watches. Others were whispering to each other, probably wondering why the entertainment had not started yet. A few had already made their way to the bar, ordering drinks to pass the time. The beautiful Steinway piano sat silent in the spotlight, like a promise that had been broken. Maria knew she should look away. She should go back to work, refill some water glasses, clear some plates. That was her job. That was what she was paid to do. But her feet would not move. Her eyes kept drifting back to that piano. It was a Steinway Model D, the finest concert grand piano money could buy. She had played one, just like it, during her final recital at Juilliard. She remembered the weight of the keys, the rich sound that filled the concert hall. The way the music seemed to pour out of her soul and into the air. That was 5 years ago. A lifetime ago. She had not touched a piano in almost 8 months now. The keyboard in her apartment sat covered in dust, a painful reminder of everything she had lost. Sometimes she would sit on the bench and just stare at the keys, unable to bring herself to play. It hurt too much. Every note reminded her of who she used to be. Every melody brought back memories of a future that would never come. But right now, watching that beautiful instrument sit abandoned in the spotlight, something stirred inside her. Something she had tried very hard to bury. She knew the program for tonight. She had heard the event coordinator discussing it earlier. Chopin, Debussy, Rachmaninoff. Some of the most beautiful piano pieces ever written. She had played them all. Not just played them, mastered them. These were the same pieces she had performed at her senior recital. The performance that had made her professors stand and applaud. The performance that was supposed to launch her career. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Muscle memory. Even after all these months, her hands remembered every note. But what was she thinking? She was a waitress. A nobody in a black uniform and worn-out shoes. These people did not want to hear her play. They were expecting a world-famous pianist, not some server who used to have dreams. She shook her head and turned away. This was not her problem. This was not her place. She needed to get back to work before someone noticed she had been standing there doing nothing. But then she heard something that made her stop. It was Mr. Harrington's voice. He was talking to his wife, trying to comfort her, but his words carried across the room. "I am so sorry," he said. "I know how much this night means to you. We will figure something out. We always do." Mrs. Harrington shook her head. Her eyes were wet. "This was supposed to be special," she whispered. "For the children. All those children counting on us." Maria felt her heart squeeze. She had almost forgotten. This was not just a fancy party for rich people. The Harrington Foundation raised money for children's hospitals. Every dollar collected tonight would go to kids who were sick. Kids who were fighting battles they were too young to understand. Kids like the ones Maria had seen in the hospital when her mother was getting treatment. Small faces, brave smiles, tiny hands holding on to hope. She thought about her mother, about those long nights in the hospital waiting room, about the doctors and nurses who had worked so hard to save her, about the bills that had piled up. Yes, but also about the kindness they had received, the strangers who had donated to help with expenses, the community that had rallied around them when they had nothing left. She had been given so much. And what had she given back? Her eyes moved to the piano again. Her heart was pounding now, so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. This was crazy. This was absolutely insane. She could lose her job. She could embarrass herself in front of the most powerful people in the city. She could fail. And failing here meant failing in front of everyone. But what if she did not fail? The thought came out of nowhere. Quiet but steady. What if she did not fail? What if, for one night, she remembered who she used to be? What if she stopped being invisible and let herself be seen? Her hands were shaking. Her mouth was dry. Every logical part of her brain was screaming at her to walk away, to stay quiet, to keep her head down like she always did. But there was another voice too, a smaller voice, buried deep beneath years of disappointment and heartbreak. And that voice was asking a simple question: if not now, when? Before she could talk herself out of it, Maria set down her tray. She wiped her hands on her apron. She took a deep breath, and she started walking. Each step felt like a mile. She could feel other servers watching her, their eyes wide with confusion. What was she doing? Where was she going? Had she lost her mind? Maybe she had. Maybe this was the craziest thing she had ever done. But she kept walking. Mrs. Whitmore was still on the phone when Maria approached her. The event coordinator looked up with irritation, ready to snap at whoever was interrupting her. But when she saw it was just a waitress, her expression shifted to confusion. "What is it?" she asked sharply. "I am very busy right now." Maria's voice came out quieter than she intended. "I can play." Mrs. Whitmore blinked. "Excuse me?" Maria cleared her throat and tried again. "The piano. I can play. I know the program. I can do it." For a long moment, Mrs. Whitmore just stared at her. Her eyes moved from Maria's face to her uniform, to her simple shoes, to the notepad sticking out of her apron pocket. The look on her face was clear. She thought Maria was joking. Or worse, she thought Maria was wasting her time. "You," she said slowly. "You can play piano." "Yes," Maria nodded. Her heart was beating so fast she thought she might pass out. "I studied at Juilliard. I graduated 5 years ago. I know every piece on tonight's program. I can play them." Mrs. Whitmore's expression did not change. If anything, she looked even more skeptical. "Juilliard? she repeated, like the word made no sense. And now you are a waitress. Maria felt her cheeks burn. She knew how it sounded. She knew how she looked. A Juilliard graduate serving champagne to billionaires. It was the kind of story that made people uncomfortable, because it reminded them that dreams do not always come true. Things happened, Maria said quietly. Mrs. Whitmore looked at her for a long time. Maria could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The risk was huge. If Maria was lying, or if she was not good enough, the entire evening would be ruined. The Harringtons would be humiliated. The foundation would suffer. And Mrs. Whitmore would be the one to blame. But the alternative was no music at all. Finally, Mrs. Whitmore leaned in close. Her voice was barely a whisper, but every word was sharp as a knife. If you embarrass this family, she said, if you embarrass me, you will never work in this city again. Do you understand? Maria met her eyes. There was no anger there. No defiance. Just quiet certainty. I understand. Mrs. Whitmore stared at her for one more second. Then she stepped aside. The piano is yours. Maria walked toward the Steinway. 300 pairs of eyes followed her. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Who was she? What was she doing? Was this some kind of joke? She heard someone laugh. A short, sharp sound. Someone else muttered something she could not quite catch. But the tone was clear enough. Doubt. Mockery. Disbelief. She kept walking. The spotlight was warm on her face as she reached the piano. Up close, it was even more beautiful than she remembered. The black lacquer finish gleamed like a mirror. The keys were perfect, white and black, waiting for her touch. She sat down on the bench. The leather was cool beneath her. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling their familiar weight. For a moment, everything went quiet. The whispers stopped. The laughter faded. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. Maria closed her eyes. She thought about her mother. About the little girl who used to play on a broken keyboard. About the young woman who had conquered Juilliard. About the dreams she had buried and the hope she had lost. And then she thought about now. This moment. This chance. She took one last breath, and she began to play. The first note floated into the air like a single drop of rain before a storm. Soft. Gentle. Almost fragile. Maria kept her eyes closed, her fingers resting on the keys, feeling the vibration travel through the wood and into her bones. She had chosen to begin with Chopin's Ballade. No. 1-inch G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire. It was also one of the most beautiful. She had played it dozens of times at Juilliard, but never like this, never with so much riding on every single note. The second note followed the first, then the third, then a cascade of sound that began to fill the massive ballroom, like water filling a glass. The melody was slow at first, hesitant, like someone waking up from a long sleep. Maria let her fingers remember what her mind had tried so hard to forget. In the audience, a woman in a red gown whispered something to her husband. He shushed her without taking his eyes off the piano. A waiter who had been clearing glasses stopped in his tracks, his tray forgotten in his hands. Near the back of the room, Mrs. Whitmore stood with her arms crossed, her face unreadable, waiting to see if she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Maria heard none of it. She was somewhere else now, somewhere far away from the chandeliers and the champagne and the judgmental stares. She was back in her grandmother's living room, 4 years old, discovering that her small fingers could make magic on those yellowed keys. She was in her high school auditorium, 15 years old, performing for a crowd that gave her a standing ovation. She was at Juilliard, 21 years old, playing this exact piece while her professor wiped tears from his eyes. The music grew stronger. The melody rose and fell like waves on an ocean, sometimes crashing with power, sometimes retreating into whispers. Maria's hands moved across the keys with a grace that seemed almost impossible. It was not just technique. It was not just practice. It was something deeper. Something that came from a place inside her that had been locked away for far too long. A man in the front row leaned forward in his seat. He was a music producer, one of the most successful in the industry. He had discovered some of the biggest names in classical music over the past 3 decades. He had heard thousands of pianists play thousands of pieces. But something about this was different. Something about this waitress in her plain black uniform was making the hair on his arms stand up. The piece moved into its second section, and Maria let the emotion pour through her fingers. She thought about her mother, about those terrible months in the hospital, about the fear and the pain and the prayers that sometimes felt like they disappeared into empty air. She thought about the bills that had stolen her future, about the rejection letters that had broken her heart one by one, about the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering if she would ever feel whole again. All of it went into the music. Every tear, every disappointment, every moment of despair, but also every moment of hope, every small victory, every reason she had to keep going even when giving up seemed so much easier. The audience was completely silent now. No one moved. No one whispered. No one even seemed to breathe. 300 of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the country sat frozen in their chairs, held captive by a woman they had not even noticed an hour ago. In the middle of the room, an older woman pressed her hand to her chest. Tears were streaming down her face, leaving tracks in her carefully applied makeup. She did not wipe them away. She did not care. The music had reached inside her and touched something she had protected for years. Memories of her own lost dreams, her own abandoned hopes, her own roads not taken. She was not the only one crying. Maria's fingers flew across the keys as the piece built toward its climax. The notes came faster now, more urgent, more desperate. It was like watching someone fight their way out of darkness, clawing toward a light they could barely see. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom, bouncing off the walls, wrapping around every person in the room. Mr. Harrington reached for his wife's hand. She squeezed it tight, her eyes fixed on the young woman at the piano. This was supposed to be their night, their event, their moment to shine, but watching Maria play, neither of them cared about any of that anymore. This was bigger than their foundation, bigger than their family name. This was something rare, something true. The final section of the piece arrived like a wave breaking on the shore. Maria played with everything she had left. Her arms ached. Her fingers burned. Sweat dripped down the back of her neck, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Not now, not when she was finally remembering who she was. The last notes hung in the air like the final words of a prayer. Soft again. Gentle again. But different now. There was peace in them. Resolution. A story that had finally found its ending. Maria lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment, there was nothing. Just silence. Just the echo of the music fading into memory. Maria kept her eyes closed. Afraid to look. Afraid to see the disappointment or the mockery she was sure would be waiting for her. Then someone started clapping. It was a single pair of hands at first. Then another. Then another. And then, like a dam breaking, the entire room exploded into applause. Maria opened her eyes. People were standing. Every single person in that ballroom was on their feet, clapping and cheering and wiping tears from their eyes. The sound was deafening. It washed over her like a wave, warm and overwhelming and almost impossible to believe. She sat there, stunned, unable to move. This was not real. This could not be real. She was a waitress. She was nobody. These people did not even know her name, but they were standing. For her, the applause went on and on. It seemed like it would never stop. People were shouting now, calling out words she could barely hear over the noise. Bravo. Magnificent. Incredible. Maria felt something wet on her cheeks. She touched her face and realized she was crying. She had not even noticed. The tears just came, flowing freely, carrying with them years of grief and loneliness and silent suffering. In the crowd, the music producer was already making his way toward the front of the room. His mind was racing. He had to talk to her. He had to know her story. In 30 years, he had never heard anyone play like that. There was something special about her. Something that could not be taught or bought. Something that only came from living and losing and finding a way to survive. Near the service entrance, the other waiters stood in a cluster, their mouths hanging open. They had worked beside Maria for years. They had shared breaks with her, complained about difficult customers with her, treated her like she was one of them. They had no idea. None of them had any idea. Mrs. Whitmore uncrossed her arms. Her face was still unreadable. But if you looked closely, you could see something shining in her eyes. Relief, maybe. Or something more. Something like wonder. The applause finally began to fade. People started sitting back down, but the energy in the room had completely changed. There was electricity in the air now. Excitement. The kind of buzz that only happens when people know they have witnessed something extraordinary. Mr. Harrington was the first to reach the piano. He walked up to Maria with tears in his eyes and took her hand in both of his. He did not say anything at first. He just looked at her. Really looked at her. Like he was seeing her for the first time. That, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Maria did not know what to say. Words felt too small for this moment. So she just nodded, her hand still trembling in his. "Where have you been hiding?" Mr. Harrington asked. "How is it possible that someone with your gift has been serving us champagne all these years?" Maria opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. How could she explain? How could she put into words the medical bills and the rejection letters and the dreams that had died slowly over 5 long years? How could she make him understand what it felt like to have everything and lose it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but survival? But maybe she did not need to explain. Maybe the music had already said everything that needed to be said. More people were approaching now. A woman in diamonds. A man in a perfectly tailored suit. Faces she had seen 100 times from across the room. People she had served drinks to without ever meeting their eyes. They were all looking at her now. Really looking. And for the first time in years, Maria did not feel invisible. She felt seen. The rest of that night passed like a dream. Maria played 3 more pieces, each one greeted with the same thunderous applause as the first. By the time she finished, her fingers were sore and her back ached from sitting on that bench for so long. But she had never felt more alive. When she finally stood up from the piano, people surrounded her like she was a celebrity. Hands reached out to shake hers. Voices called out praise and congratulations. Faces that had looked right through her for 3 years now looked at her with wonder and respect. She did not know how to handle it. Part of her wanted to run back to the service entrance, put on her apron, and pretend none of this had happened. That was the safe choice, the familiar choice. But something had shifted inside her tonight. Something that could not be undone. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached her through the crowd. She introduced herself as the director of the city's Philharmonic Orchestra. She pressed a business card into Maria's hand and said 4 words that made Maria's heart stop. "I want to talk." Before Maria could respond, someone else appeared at her elbow. It was the music producer she had noticed earlier. The one who had been watching her so intently. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with deep lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling. Or maybe from years of listening. "I have been in this business for 30 years, he said quietly. "I have heard the best pianists in the world, and I have never heard anyone play the way you played tonight." Maria did not know what to say. The words felt stuck in her throat. "Here." He handed her his card. "Call me. Please. I do not say this lightly. You have something special. Something that should not be hidden away in a hotel uniform." By the time the gala ended, Maria had 17 business cards in her apron pocket. 17. She counted them twice on the bus ride home because she could not believe it was real. Music directors. Producers. Agents. People who had the power to change her life with a single phone call. She walked into her small apartment just after midnight. Everything looked the same. The worn couch. The tiny kitchen. the stack of bills on the counter. But everything felt different. She walked over to the piano in the corner, the one she had not touched in 8 months. She pulled off the dusty cover and sat down on the bench. The keys were cold beneath her fingers. She played a simple scale. Then another. Then a melody she had loved since childhood. The notes filled her tiny apartment, bouncing off the walls, chasing away the silence that had lived there for so long. She played until the sun came up. The weeks that followed were a blur of phone calls and meetings and opportunities she never thought she would have again. The orchestra director invited her to audition. And when Maria sat down at the piano in that empty concert hall, she played like her life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. She got the position. Second pianist for the City Philharmonic. It was not the lead role, but it did not matter. It was a foot in the door. A chance to play again. A chance to remember who she was supposed to be. The music producer was true to his word as well. He helped her record a demo, just a few pieces, nothing fancy. But he sent it to people he knew, people who mattered, and soon Maria was getting calls from places she had only dreamed about. 3 months after the gala, she received the news that changed everything. She had been invited to perform a solo concert at Lincoln Center. Lincoln Center, the same stage where the greatest pianists in history had played, the same stage she had dreamed about as a little girl, sitting at her grandmother's broken keyboard, imagining a future that seemed impossibly far away. She called her mother first. She could barely get the words out through her tears. Her mother cried too. That deep, heavy crying that comes from years of worry finally being released. They stayed on the phone for an hour, laughing and sobbing and saying "I love you" over and over again. The night of the concert arrived faster than Maria expected. She stood backstage, wearing a beautiful black gown that had been donated by one of the guests from the Harrington Gala. Her hair was down for the first time in years, falling in soft curls around her shoulders. She looked like a different person. She felt like a different person. But some things had not changed. Her hands were still trembling. Her heart was still racing. The fear was still there, whispering in her ear that she was not good enough, that she did not belong here, that everyone would see through her, and realize she was just a waitress pretending to be something more. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about all the nights she had spent crying alone in her apartment, all the rejection letters, all the times she had wanted to give up. She thought about her mother, fighting cancer with a strength Maria could only dream of having. She thought about her grandmother, who had given her that first keyboard and told her to never stop playing. She thought about that night at the hotel. The moment she set down her tray and walked toward the piano. The moment she chose to stop being invisible. That was the moment everything changed. Not because of luck, not because of talent, because she had finally found the courage to try. A stagehand appeared at her side. 5 minutes, Miss Gonzalez. Maria nodded. She walked to the edge of the curtain and peeked out at the audience. The concert hall was packed. Over 2,000 people, all waiting to hear her play. In the front row, she spotted a familiar face, her mother. Sitting right there in the center, wearing her best dress, her eyes already shining with tears. She had never seen Maria perform on a stage like this. All those years of sacrifice, all those hospital visits, all those bills that had nearly destroyed them both, it had all led to this moment. Maria felt her own tears threatening to fall. She blinked them back. Not yet. There would be time for crying later. Right now, she had a concert to play. The lights dimmed, the audience fell silent. Maria walked out onto the stage. The spotlight was warm on her face, just like it had been at the hotel. But this time, there were no whispers of doubt, no smirks of disbelief, just 2,000 people holding their breath, waiting to hear her story. She sat down at the piano, a Steinway Model D, just like the one at the Grand Meridian. She placed her fingers on the keys and looked out at the sea of faces. "This concert is dedicated to my mother," she said softly into the microphone, "who taught me that dreams do not die. They just wait for us to be brave enough to chase them again." In the front row, her mother covered her mouth with her hand. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Maria smiled. Then she began to play. The music filled the concert hall like light filling a dark room. It was the same music she had played at the gala, but it sounded different now. Fuller. Richer. More alive. Because Maria was different now. She was no longer playing to prove herself. She was playing to celebrate everything she had survived. 2 hours later, she played the final note. The audience rose to their feet before the sound had even faded. The applause was deafening. A wave of love and admiration that washed over her and lifted her up. She stood and bowed, tears finally falling freely down her face. She looked at her mother, who was clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. She looked at the crowd, strangers who had become witnesses to her second chance. She thought about the waitress who had walked into that hotel 3 months ago. The invisible girl, with dust on her dreams. That girl felt like a stranger now. A ghost from another life. Maria Gonzalez had finally found her way back to the music. And this time, she was never letting go. Sometimes life breaks you down so completely that you forget who you are. You forget what you are capable of. You forget that inside you, there is still a spark waiting to become a flame. But if you are brave enough to try, if you are strong enough to keep going even when everything seems lost, that spark can ignite again. And when it does, it can light up the whole world.